I'm sorry, ma'am. You said what? I don't think I've ever heard a witness say that. Day 16 of Karen Read's trial wrapped up on Thursday, and there was a lot that happened in one big shocker. Hi, my name is Sydney Rushing. I'm a criminal defense attorney in the state of Michigan. Now let's talk about it. Court started off with the continuation of the forensic scientist from the Massachusetts State Police, Miss Harnett. They first talked about the taillight housing and they showed a picture of it. In relation to the hoodie and the t-shirt that John was wearing, she took scrapings and any of the debris she found, she put them in one bag. She said she couldn't testify about the chain of custody of those items because Proctor was the one who submitted them. He submitted swabs from the solo cups and the broken glass to the lab. Fingernail clippings taken from John were also submitted to the lab. And a vial of John's blood was also submitted to the lab by the DA's office. A redirect from Brennan, she couldn't testify as to what was actually in the solo cups because she couldn't say. She knew that they were collected from the scene, but she didn't know any of the specifics. Brennan then asked her about the hair on the vehicle. He showed her a few photos, asked her if she saw snow in that area, things like that. And then he also asked if water can basically act like glue. Leslie had a very brief recross. Then when Judge Cannoni was excusing her and telling her she could step down, she looked at Judge Cannoni and said, "I want to correct something that I testified to yesterday. But ma'am, that is not how this works. You weren't asked a question. Nobody was soliciting information from you. You cannot give testimony that was not asked for." And during my 10 years of practicing as a criminal defense attorney, I've never seen this happen. After a brief sidebar, Judge Cannoni excused her and said that nobody had any questions anymore, and that was that. Then the Commonwealth called witness number 30, which is Dr. Scortabello, and she's a new witness, and she's the medical examiner. Obviously, we started off with the background information and that she's been a medical examiner for 17 years. He explained how she reaches a conclusion of a manner of death, or, the cause of death. I think it's obvious to say this, but clearly she looks at everything inside the body, literally everything. And then she also said there's a toxicology test in every case. There's 5 causes of death that her office uses: natural, accidental, homicide, which is the unaliving by someone else, and then there's the one where you do it to yourself, and then unknown. Autopsy was completed on January 31st of 2022. She made it clear that she's independent from the Massachusetts State Police and the DA's office. And throughout her whole testimony, obviously there was lots of autopsy photos shown. She noted a laceration on John's eyelid and his nose. Judge Cannoni did tell the juries that they did not have to look at the photos right now, but that they would have to look at them at some point. And honestly, I don't know how I feel about that, because I think it would be better for them to look at it then so you knew they were actually looking at it. And she also cautioned them that they are to not give any pity or sympathy to John because of these photos. She continued to testify about her findings that she found throughout John's body, which would take literally way too much time for me to go through in this very short amount of recap time that I have. She said she measured the length of the arm injuries, but she didn't do the depth, and she can't say how they happened. And they took a much needed break for the jury, and when they returned, you already know what happened, a sidebar. Then once her testimony resumed, she said that John had no illicit drugs in his blood system, but he had an ethanol level of 0.21. She ruled that the cause of death was a blunt impact to the head and a contributing factor of hypothermia. However, she was not able to reach a manner of death to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, so it was marked as unknown. Alessi then did the cross, and he got some more details about how an autopsy is done. She also confirmed that they don't go to the scene as part of their findings, but they will consider information that are in reports that they receive. She was informed by Proctor of the police's working theory at the time of the autopsy. She was asked if she considered other reasons for John's body being at 80 degrees, to which she said no. However, she did say that sepsis can cause somebody's body temperature to drop like that, but that wasn't the case here. She says she doesn't come up with hypotheticals for how an injury happens. She just does her job, which is to state and describe the injuries, state the cause of death and why a person died, and then try to make a determination if she can. She did not observe any indication of grass in any of the injuries. Does make some considerations as to what happened internally, and sometimes talks about these with her colleagues, but she did not take any notes of this on her autopsy report. They break for lunch, they come back from lunch, of course they have another sidebar, and then cross-examination continues. She agreed that hypothermia is a hard diagnosis to make. Her diagnosis came from her findings and from Proctor's statements to her. And then there was a little bit of a slip up. She was discussing the initial death notification that she received, and that there was a reference to some altercation and then an objection came from the people, and the judge told the jury that they could not consider that statement that she just made. Altercation or dispute. Interesting. And there was a lot of very specific and technical medical questions that were asked and discussed. More autopsy photos are shown, and then the jury is given another break, much needed break at that. I mean, they're literally looking at a stomach coming out of his body and all of that. Ugh. After the break, we find out that there were no signs of frostbite. She said the laceration on John's eye could be consistent with a punch, but it could not happen from falling backwards and hitting his head. And again, she did not determine the cause of injuries for the injuries on his arm. Redirect, Brennan had her confirm that she's done over 1,200 autopsies. He confirmed that she is not part of the criminal investigation team. And Brennan asked another question again that had to deal with Karen saying, I hit him, and I don't have any idea as to why that question was even thought of or trying to be asked, because obviously with this witness, it doesn't matter. They're the medical examiner. And they moved on and briefly talked about her experience with pedestrian vehicle accidents and things like that. And then on recross, Alessi went back to the stomach ulcers issue. She confirmed that alcohol consumption can cause stomach ulcers, and that the ulcers in John's stomach could have been from alcohol consumption instead of hypothermia. And the very last question he asked, and a strong ending point for him, was that even after all of her findings and all the information she had, she could not make a determination and rule on the manner of death for John, and it was marked as unknown. Then she was excused and the jury was released for the day. Then we have some discovery arguments made on both sides, and one of them being a report that is super late and super convenient to the prosecution that totally blows up a timeline and really has a huge impact on the defense's case and how they've presented so far. And having this information come in can totally change all of that. I don't think that Judge Cannoni should let this report in. So that's it for your day 16 recap. I'm so glad you guys are here. Thank you for following along. And make sure to come back for day 17, and we're going to see how this case goes. I don't think I'm very confident anymore that they're going to end this week. I think the prosecution is going to go into early next week with their case in chief. Here's the question of the day. Do you think that it's very telling that the medical examiner, even after hearing all of the information, could not make a determination on his death and instead said unknown versus homicide or accident when she knew that potentially the police were thinking that this was a vehicle-involved collision with John? You know what I mean? What do you think? Let me know in the comments.